the GeekStorian. Welcome back to my channel, or if this is your first time here, officially welcome to the channel. Today we're going to talk about one of Nintendo's lesser loved but potentially most adorable protagonists, Kirby. We're going to dig into where he came from, what his inspiration was, how he got his name, and maybe talk a bit about his species and various appearances. So strap in and get ready for an all-you-can-eat buffet, assuming you can beat the little guy to the table before he eats all of it. Our little pink hero here was the brainchild of a company called HAL Laboratory. HAL got its start in 1980 making games for the Commodore Max and the MSX personal computers, with just one part-time programmer whose name I think I'll just keep to myself from now. It was personally through his influence and insistence that HAL Laboratories began a relationship with Nintendo in the first place. This was their first entry into the console market, making games like Golf, Joust, Balloon Fight, and Adventures of Lolo. Come to think of it, Lolo and Kirby, they look awfully similar. I wonder if they're the same or some subspecies of each other. Maybe we'll dig into that later. Still, they would continue on to act as more and more of a second-party development house for Nintendo till around 1991, when they released Metal Slayer Glory. If you don't recognize this title, don't worry, it was only ever released on the Famicom line of systems. During this game's development, they came under a severe financial strain, of which Nintendo would eventually offer to help them out of, on one condition: they become an official second-party developer and place Satoru Iwata as their president, who consequently was the self-same person they had hired all those years ago as a part-time programmer, and as you may know, a subsequent president of Nintendo, showing that not only did he understand the development side, but had a head for business as well. It was a good thing they bailed out HAL Laboratories too, because just 2 years after they bailed out the company, Michiru Sakurai would come up with the idea for Kirby's Dream Land. However, that actually wasn't its initial name, or Kirby's initial name. Kirby was originally called Po Po Po, which roughly translated means pow 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 in English, not really anything Americans would actually consider a name. The game name during development was Po 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 of the Spring Breeze. It was later actually changed to Twinkie Popo, which admittedly outside of a Japanese audience likely wouldn't translate either. So far so good. Development's going well along with the level design, but they really hadn't finished a character design. You see, oddly enough that the character we all know so well today wasn't intentional. He was a placeholder. A placeholder in development is a quickly developed asset that you can use while working on things like level designs, etc., independent of the final art. When the final art is ready, it simply just replaces those self-same locations. However, something odd happened while they're working on their little placeholder. The developers actually became pretty fond of the little guy, so the placeholder actually ended up becoming the final design for the character. It was then that they were almost ready to publish the game. However, this kind of came with its own challenges. They really didn't get enough advanced orders to effectively release the game, but instead of just dropping the project entirely, they went to Nintendo and said, hey, can you publish this instead of us? Nintendo took a look at it and agreed that there was something here and began an extensive marketing campaign on the new game. It was then that the developers decided to take a second look at the character's name and decided it needed a different name to garner more international appeal. They decided to poll Nintendo of America for a suggestion, eventually coming up with the name Kirby. Why Kirby, you ask? Good question. Let's take a look. The year was 1984, and Nintendo was in a bit of legal trouble. You see, Universal Studios was filing a lawsuit against Nintendo for their use of their protagonist Donkey Kong. The claim was that they used the likeness of King Kong in his design without licensing the rights to do so. Nintendo in return hired the lawyer by the name of John Kirby. Kirby began building an argument using Universal's own case against RKO against them, where they had declared that King Kong was public domain. Therefore, Nintendo's use of a large ape-like character kidnapping a young woman was also public domain. Kirby won the case, which was a huge deal for Nintendo because it saved their place in the American gaming market. And thanks for aiding them, Nintendo gave Kirby a $30,000 sailboat, christened the Donkey Kong, and later, as per the poll at Nintendo of America, named their new protagonist after him, even sending him a copy of Kirby's Dream Land as a further thank you. What's interesting about this first Kirby game is it's not, well, Kirby as we know him. The first and most notable thing is that Kirby cannot copy enemies. Instead, he used a more traditional power-up methodology. Food-related power-ups would show up like spicy curry that would give him fire breath, a mint leaf that would let him fire air puffs rapidly without losing flight. These weren't really all that necessary in the game, but fun, different changes to augment the gameplay. This isn't to say that Kirby didn't have a way to inhale things, he did. It was still his main attack. It would just suck up an enemy and spit them out as a star, or be used to suck up objects and throw them at a boss. Speaking of bosses, remember Lolo? Well, if not, I like him, so here's the castle of Lololo. And who do you have to deal with as a boss here? None other than Lolo himself. Why is Kirby beating up on my man Lolo? Not cool, Kirby. Not cool. The thing is, Kirby wasn't even his iconic color at this time. Nintendo of America actually set his color to white on the Game Boy box art using the monochromatic screen as a reference for his coloring. So, when did he get his signature color and copy ability? Funny you should ask that. Kirby's Adventure on the NES is where Kirby would get a bit of a makeover in the mechanics. This would make his gameplay far more dynamic and interesting. You see, there were plenty of platformers that used items for power-ups, and the team wanted a way to shake things up. They decided to adapt Kirby's trademark attack from the first game, so that on top of being able to spit enemies out as a star, he could mimic or copy some of the enemy's abilities. And it worked. It gave the character a personality all on his own, while still doing many of the same things that earlier games were doing with regular power-ups, but in a more interactive and interesting way, showcasing just how small tweaks to basic mechanics can add a ton of flavor and personality to a character or series. This was also Kirby's first outing on the color system, and people in the States at least got their first glimpse of the playful pink color the team had chosen for the character's signature look. Between his color, his upbeat personality, cute aesthetics, and ability to, well, eat everything, Nintendo had a hit on their hands, and they knew it. Kirby would go on to appear in tons of Nintendo properties, being used almost as much as Mario for a long while, showing up in his own mini-golf games, puzzle games, platformers, compilation titles, and even get starting in many other games like Smash Bros. However, video games couldn't quite contain the lasting appeal of the little guy. The little puffball would even go on to star in his own animated series called Kirby Right Back At Ya, set in an alternate universe from the games that went into an explanation of Kirby's history, explaining that he was a legendary Star Warrior who, according to legend, was fated to save Popstar from destruction. However, he got woken up 200 years too early and thus had a lot of baby and childlike qualities, often needing help from his friends to come to grips with his abilities. It was even implied that he was made by an evil entity called Nightmare, but refused to follow his orders and was discarded into the depths of space. Pretty heavy stuff for Kirby, honestly. The game lore takes a slightly different and more vague route in explaining Kirby and his species. First off, he's not really the only one of his species. They actually come in a pretty wide variety of colors, mostly various different pastel color variations of Kirby himself. It also suggests that Galagonite and Meta Knight may also be part of the self-same species. Later games also suggest a more drastic origin of Kirby, that he's the positive recreation of a entity known as the Void, who often appears as the final antagonist in the overall series. So you can see that his origin and species remain vague, I suspect intentionally, so as to leave it up to the player or players' imagination. Games and anime wouldn't be all for Kirby. He would even go on to star in his own manga adaptations, the longest running of which is Kirby of the Stars, the story of DDD who lives in Poo Poo Poo. I know, I don't get these names either. Regardless, there's no denying the appeal of Kirby at this point. With all the anime, manga, and appearing as a guest or main star in over 80 games at this point in his 30-year history, there appears to be no stopping the childlike charisma of the Star Warrior, who has rarely, if ever, missed an entry on any Nintendo console, unlike many of Nintendo's IPs, F-Zero and Metroid just to name a few. What are some of your favorite memories of this little guy? Did you ever actually dive into the Kirby series at all? And if so, how much did you enjoy it? Do you still play the games today? Let me know in the comments. As always, thank you for spending part of your day with me. And if you could do me one more favor, hit that like button. It really helps me out and lets me know that you like my content and helps the channel. Also, if you're new here, consider subscribing. That helps me out a ton. However, for now, have a great rest of your day, and until next time, happy gaming.